Did you know what CSS actually means? Or did you know we can write CSS in 3 different ways? And did you know we have 5 different CSS techniques to create a website layout? If your answer is no, you must watch this video till the end. In this video, we'll be learning the basics of CSS. We'll explore all the CSS types, namely inline, internal, and external CSS, along with the CSS layout options, namely float, table, flex, column, and grid layout. And then we'll recreate this beautiful web page layout from WordPress Academia theme. We'll also look at some of the HTML markups that we did not cover in our HTML lesson. If you haven't mastered HTML yet, please watch that video first. You can find the link for that video in the description below, and then get back to this video. If you already know about HTML, you are good to go through this video. Before starting, please hit the like button and subscribe us. Don't forget to hit the bell icon to get notification whenever a new video is uploaded in our channel. Welcome to webtrickshome. Let's create a folder for our project first. Let's say CSS Basic. Then create a new HTML file inside it. Let's say CSS lesson1.html. Open it in the text editor. Let's add the basic HTML markups. Let's give it a title. Let's say CSS Basics. Let's see the HTML markups we skipped on our previous video first. That will take around a minute. Basically, the HTML markups we are going to learn here do not have a specific meaning for the browsers, but will be helpful in creating layout. The most used HTML markup in web page design is div. This markup has no default stylings. This is a block element, and it's mostly used to group other HTML markups. That's very useful in creating web page layouts. Add anything inside the div, and then add something after the div. And you'll see the div content appear in a separate line in the browser. Alright. Another highly used HTML markup is span. It is an inline element and is useful when you want to add styles to inline contents. Like if you want to change the color of a letter or a word or a phrase within a group, span will be used. Furthermore, you can find a number of semantic HTML markups which are basically block elements, like header to group the elements that belong to the heading section of a page, footer to group the footer elements, nav to group the nav elements, content to group a set of contents, section to group each section, and aside to group the sidebar elements. These markups are optional but are quite useful on locating content inside a HTML file quickly whenever you need to modify them, especially after a couple of years after you built it. Got it? Let's get back to CSS then. That's what we are going to learn here, right? CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheet, but before knowing about Cascading Style Sheet, you must know about styles. Style denotes the embellishment, or you can say decoration of an HTML element. There are 3 ways we can style our HTML elements, namely inline style, internal style, and external style. And this is the style we call CSS. Why do we call it CSS? We'll learn in a short while. Let's have a look at inline style first. Let's comment this out. Let's say I want to add some styles to this heading. Then we can go to the opening HTML markup and add an attribute named style and add the styling properties and values inside it. Let's see some styling properties that are easy to remember. I'll go with color here, then colon and a color value. You can add any color name. Let's say red. Refresh the browser and you can see the style is applied. Let's add another property too. And to add multiple properties, you must close each property with a semicolon. Let's define a font size. The default font size for S1 is 32 pixels, so I'll go with 46 pixels. Refresh the browser, and you can see the font size is changed. The heading is bold by default, so I'll change it to normal text width. You can find a couple of values you can go with for font weight, but normal and bold works best for default fonts. And you can see the font weight is changed. We can also use text decoration property to add underline, overline, or strike through to the text. And you can see the effect. We can code the whole web page with inline style, but this will make the file clumsy. Let's have a look at one of the samples. You can see inline styles added to HTML markups here. And you can see how clumsy the file looks. Even finding the actual content becomes harder with so much inline styles. So firstly, it makes the HTML file ugly. Second thing is that you'll need to add inline style to each HTML markups, even if you need to apply the same style to multiple elements. So the styles are not reusable unless you copy and paste them to each elements. Let's make them heading 3. And the most important thing is it impacts your web page's search ranking negatively. So we should avoid inline styles. So that's all about inline styles. Then let's see the internal style then. Let's add a paragraph to apply internal style. To apply internal style, we need to add a style markup, which you can add inside the head markup, right after the opening body markup, or right before the closing body markup. I want to style the P element, so I'll write P here, followed by curly braces. Then inside the curly braces, we'll add the style properties and values. Alright, let's make it blue. I'll add one more property, line height, that defines the spacing between two lines of text within the paragraph. The value can be in any measurement unit. I'll go with 1.6 em, which means 1.6 times the size of the text. Since the text size is 16 pixels by default, the line height will be 25.6 pixels. This way you don't need to change the line height even if you change the text size, okay? You can see the paragraph here. Comment the line height. That's how we comment the styles. And you can see the default line height here. Remove the comment. And you can see the difference. Now, with internal style applied to a paragraph element, every time we add a paragraph in our file, the same styles will be applied without us needing to write the properties again and again. So, inline style is highly reusable and it keeps the HTML file clean too. And it does not affect the search ranking negatively as well. But with internal styles, all the elements with same HTML markup will have the same styles, right? Suppose you had a paragraph and do not want to apply the same style. You can see the styles are already applied here. So, how can we rectify that? Well, we add naming attributes to the HTML markups to avoid such situations. And we'll apply styles to the names rather than the markups. So, whenever we need to apply same styles, we'll give them the same name, and elements with no names or different names won't get those styles applied. If we want to add some styles to a markup universally in the entire file, we'll style the markup itself. Let's have a look. The first attribute we use for naming an element is class. Let's give it a name. Let's say stylize. Then, instead of P inside the style markup, I'll go with the same name stylize. Refresh the browser. And you see the style is not applied, right? That's because HTML does not recognize any markup named stylize. So we need to indicate here that stylize is a class name, not an HTML markup. To do that, all you need to do is add a dot in front of the class name without leaving any space between. Refresh the browser, and you can see the style is applied to the paragraph with class name stylize. Now, if you want the same style applied to another element, which can be any element, you can simply add the same class name. Refresh the browser, and you can see the effect. Easy, right? One thing you need to remember here is that CSS is case sensitive, so if you write the class name with different case, it will be treated as a separate entity by CSS. Let's have a look. Just make the first letter capital, and you can see the style is not applied to it. Another naming rule is that you can't start a class name with a number. Let's try it out. And you can see the style is not applied. You can add a number to the class name in the middle or end though. Last but not the least on the naming rule is you can't add a space in the name. Let's try it out. And you can see there's no style applied to the paragraph. CSS recognizes words with spaces as different entities or different names. You can add as many class names to an element as you want, but when adding styles to them, either connect each of them with dots with no spaces between the names, or just apply styles to one of the names, and that will work fine. If you want to add meaningful names to an element with two words, then you can connect the words with hyphen or underscore, and CSS will recognize them as a single word. You can also use a snake case or camel case to join two words into one. And you can see the style is applied here. Then let's see another condition with styling. Let's say we have two class names in an element and both class names have some conflicting style values. Here, let's add the color green to the paragraph text with stylize. You can see the color is appearing green here. Then we'll add the style to the class me with color blue. Since both class names point to the same HTML element, which style will be applied. Let's have a look. And you see the color blue is applied here. But why? Because browsers read the file from top to bottom. So first the green color will be applied to the text, and then since the blue color is added after that, blue will be applied. The process occurs so fast that we only get to see the final color in the page. You can see both colors applied one by one in pages that take longer time to be loaded on the browser. Let's keep the blue color above the green and see if that's true. And you can see that's true, right? So that's how CSS works. This technique is highly useful when we assign general class to multiple elements and then we need to add specific properties to few of those elements. We have another naming attribute too, which we can use to add styles, and that is ID. Let's allocate a camel case name here. IDs are denoted by hash while styling. All the naming rules will be same as for the class. Let's add line height for this one. And you can see the style applied to the element. We can name multiple elements with ID too, and the style will be applied. But the general rule for web page is an ID can be used only once in a page. IDs are used mostly for JavaScript effects in a page rather than styling. JavaScript will be applied to the first element with the defined ID if there are multiple IDs with same name in a page. Since the ID where JavaScript is applied might not be the one you wanted for, adding multiple elements with same ID is not advised, right? Getting back to internal style, the only demerit it has is it cannot be used for multiple pages. Since the most basic websites do have at least 5 to 7 pages, you'll need to copy and paste all the properties again and again to all pages. With larger websites, the page count will be in thousands and you won't like to add styles to each pages when you have some better option, right? So, what's the better option? Well, the better option is external style. For external style, we'll create a separate file to add files. Let's say the name is style and the extension must be CSS. Open it in text editor. Let's give this heading a class name. Let's say external. Then we'll go to the CSS file and call the class name and add styles. Let's add some spacings on top and bottom of the heading. For that, I'll write margin top, let's say 50 pixel, and margin bottom to 50 pixel. If you check the browser, the styles are not going to be applied as of now. To get an external style applied to an HTML file, we'll need to add a markup link in the HTML file. Let's place it inside the head markup. The href attribute here will define the name and location of the file. You'll also need to add another attribute rel here that defines the relation of the file to the HTML file. And here the relation will be style sheet. Refresh the browser and you can see the style applied to the heading. Pink is not looking good. Let's go with orange. Well, that looks okay. So that's how external style works. And since the styles are defined in one file and applied to another file, external style is called a cascading style sheet, CSS, where cascading style means transferring style from one file to another. Got it? Let's try to apply the same CSS file to another HTML file then. I'll create a new file. Let's say dummy.html. Open it in text editor. Let's add some content with the same class. Let's add a heading. And then link the CSS file to this HTML file too. The type attribute is deprecated, so you don't need to use that. Save the file and open it in browser. And you can see the same style is applied here too. Let's add a paragraph with the same class. And you can see the same style is applied to the paragraph too. This way we can use one external CSS file with multiple HTML files. So that's all you need to know about CSS. Let's shift our focus to CSS layouts then. There are a couple of layout options we can use to create a web page layout, named a float, table, flex, column and grid layout. We'll see each of them and then use one of them to create a web page layout. Let's see the float layout first. With the float layout, we force the block elements to behave like inline elements while moving them to the left or right within a row. Let's add some contents to create a layout then. I'll create a div to hold a couple of blocks. Let's name it float holder. Let's add 3 divs inside it, and then add some contents inside each of them. I'll go with a title and a paragraph. So we have 3 divs holding contents, and those 3 divs are placed inside a div, right? Let's see how they appear in the browser. You can see the result here. Let's define the width of each of those divs inside the main div. Let's say 30%. And you can see the div is taking up 30% of the total width to display the content, but still the entire row is occupied. Let's add text align justify to make the text look better. Let's add float with value left. This will force the divs to take up the topmost possible space on the browser, aligning themselves to the left. Here you can see all 3 divs are attached to each other now, like inline elements, and the remaining 10% is taken by the preceding headings. To avoid unwanted contents to appear in unwanted sections, we can add a div right after the float divs. Let's give it a name clear. All you need to do is add a property clear with value both to create an invisible blockade that will prevent any content below that div to appear above it. You can see the result here. Now we can arrange these 3 content blocks to the left, right and center with equal distance between them. Let's move the last content block to the far right. For that, I'll add another class name to the div. Let's say float right. Then on the CSS, let's call the class name and add float right. This will override the float left property for the div defined above. You see the output here. Then we can move the center block a bit right to divide the remaining space equally on both sides. Since each of the content has 30% width, the space remaining is 10%. So if we move the center block to the right by 5%, there will be 5% blank space on both sides, right? Let's do that. Let's add a class to the central block. Let's say float center. Then call the class in CSS and add style, margin left 5%. Float has only 3 properties, left, right and none. So we're using margin left property to shift the block by 5% from left to right. And you can see the result. This way we can easily create website layout with CSS float. And float is one of the most popular layout building technique in web design. The only thing you need to keep in mind here with float layout is that you'll need to clear the floats after each section. Alternatively, you can add display table property to the parent container of your float divs, and that will help you get rid of the need to add clear after each float sections. You can see here, the headings below the float contents are not coming up. But with table, if we add paddings and width together, then the total width might exceed the width of the screen, forcing users to scroll right and left. Let's have a look here. I'll add some paddings. The difference between padding and margin is margin defines the space outside the boundary of an element, while padding defines the space between the element's boundary and actual content. Margin shifts the content left or right, while padding only adds empty space between the content's boundary and its internal content. Let's say top-bottom padding is 0 and left-right is 30 pixels. That will look good as of now. But if we add the width, let's say 100%, then you'll see the content extends the browser width and scroller appears at the bottom of the browser. You might ask here, won't it be easy if we did not add the width then? But the thing is, element width property display table will not take up the entire width of the screen unless the content is large enough to take that space. So when the content is lesser, you must add the width. Alright. Now to avoid the scroll bar from appearing at the bottom, we must add box sizing border box property to the element with display table. That will force the element to include the padding within the defined width. And you can see the result. With the table layout, we can also apply table row and table cell properties to the style elements, and that will work fine, but that will be more like creating a table structure without actually adding the HTML table markups, right? All you need to do is add the table property to the main container. Then you can apply the table cell properties to its styles. You can also go with table row property if you want to go multiple rows within a section. Table cells will be assigned equal width by default unless you define specific width for them. Display table with table is infamous because just like in table markups, you cannot add uneven number of columns in one of the table rows, and you cannot even have table cells with different width in different rows. It works fine if you went with one row in a table. You can see the result here. Another popular layout style is the flex layout. Let's go with the same content as above. And with the flex content, you do not even need to add a class to the child elements. All you need to do is call the parent class in CSS and add display flex. And you can see the content blocks are aligned left to right with equal width divided into them. Let's justify the text. Let's define the width of those block elements to create space between them. We can write flex, a space, and div. That means all div elements inside the flex class. Let's say the width is 30%. Now you can see the space on the right. Now add justify content space between to the parent class, and all the empty space will be divided equally between the blocks. Add some paddings to the parent, and that looks much better. Easy, right? By default, display flex will force all elements to appear left to right, even if you define the width greater than 100%. If you want to start exceeding content on a new row, you must add a property in text wrap with value wrap to display flex elements. Okay, let's see the column layout done. Let's copy the element from the flex. And in CSS, we call the parent class and define the number of columns we want inside that element. And you can see the result. The content blocks are divided into 3 equal width columns with equal height, and there's some space between those blocks as well. Let's justify the text here too. Add some paddings too. If you want to define the space between the blocks manually, you can add column gap property with some values, let's say 5%. And you can see the space increased, right? Column seems the easiest way to create layout, isn't it? So why is it not so popular like flex and float? Well, there's a reason. Let's have a look at it. Let's say I want the first column to hold more contents than the others. Let's add one more paragraph here. Refresh the browser, and you can see the content is divided equally into all 3 columns. If you want to force the content not to break inside a block, you can use break inside avoid to the child divs, but this property seems to depend on the content length on each of the columns. Sometimes it works great, while sometimes it causes issues, so columns are not much popular. Generally, we use columns and sections where we need to display a huge number of content blocks with unequal heights. In such cases, you define the number of columns you want in the page, and the space between the columns, and the browser will display the content on column basis rather than the row basis. Let's go with the grid layout then. Let's copy the same code block here too. Let's add parent class grid here, call the class name in CSS, and define display grid. Then you'll need to add grid template columns and define the number of columns you want with the width you want. Let's add auto here. And you can see all the contents are displayed in single column with 100% width. Add one more auto, and that will effectively divide the content into 2 equal width columns. Add one more auto, and you'll see 3 columns. You can define fixed width for each column instead of auto as well. And you can see the result. It's always better to go with auto though. You can also define grid column gap to add spacing between the columns. Let's justify the text and add some padding too. And you can see the content looks much better. Well, That's all about grid layout done. Due to the convenience they offer, flex and float are the most used layouts in CSS. Now, since we have learnt about layout options, let's use the knowledge we gained so far to recreate a website layout then. Let's have a closer look at the template we are going to recreate. We'll create color boxes to create the layout for now, so that you have a better understanding about it. Once you master it, we'll create layout with actual contents in our upcoming tutorial. Alright, let's have a look at the topmost section of the page. It's a full width section with a bit of padding on the left and right. Let's name it header. Let's give it a background color. I'll go with black. Refresh the browser and you'll see nothing there. Since the header has no content inside it, it can't take up any height. Let's add some dummy text to add height to the header. Refresh the browser and you can see the header background. The text is also black by default, so it's not visible. And you can see a bit of white space on all sides. That's the default margin an HTML file generates. To remove that, you can add asterisk margin 0, and that will effectively remove default margins from all HTML elements. Now let's remove the dummy text from header and define its height instead. Let's say 100 pixels. And with the height defined, the header will be seen in the browser even without any content inside it. Then we've got two sections inside the header. We can assign them equal width, maybe 50-50%. There's some space between the edge of the template and the contents. We'll use padding to define that space. Let's say the padding is 50 pixels on either sides and 0 on top and bottom. Padding can be defined individually for each sides, like 0, 50 pixel, 0, 50 pixel. The first value will be the top value, then the other values will be for preceding sides in clockwise direction, so that will be top, right, bottom and left padding values. Since the top and bottom as well as left and right values are equal, we can write only two values. The first value will be for top and bottom, and the second value will be for left and right paddings. Only one value will denote equal padding for all four sides. If you need to add padding to only one side, you can use padding left, padding right, padding top or padding bottom properties. Let's add display table to the header. And since there is no content inside, the table will take up the space defined by the padding. Let's define the width as 100% then. And you can see the header taking up width more than that screen has. You can tell that with the horizontal scroller appearing at the bottom of the screen. Let's add box sizing border box to avoid that. And that is fixed. Then let's add two divs inside the header. One will be logo and the other will be menu. Well, that's not menu, right? That's more like contact links. So let's name it contacts. Call the class logo in CSS and add a background. Let's say white. Give it a height. Let's say 80 pixels to make it appear on the browser. That's how it looks. Let's add 10 pixel padding on top and bottom of the header to make inner content appear vertically in the center. Well, that looks good. Then we can allocate 50% width to the logo class. For the contacts class too, we can apply the same style. Both divs are appearing on individual row for now. So let's add float left to each of them. And then you can see both divs aligned to the left inside the header. To make them look distinct, let's reduce their width to 48% and float the contacts class to the right instead. And you can see two distinct blocks inside the header. First one will hold the logo contents, while the second one will have the contacts and social links. So the header is done. Let's go for the navigation section then. It's a full width single column section. So let's add nav here and add styles. Let's make the background blue and give a height of 60 pixels. Let's take the color from the template itself. Hexadecimal color values start with a hash. Well, that looks much better. Let's go with the content section then. Well, the content section is divided into 3 columns with multiple sections here. We'll add a markup to hold all the contents. Then we'll have 3 columns inside it, with each column holding 3 sections. The middle column is larger here, and the other 2 columns seem equal. let's call the wrapper section. Then we'll have 3 columns, let's say left, center, and right. Let's add styles to them then. Let's define the section first. Give it a background. I'll go with gray. We'll add display table with 100%, padding 10 pixel and 50 pixel, and box sizing border box. Since we haven't added any content, the height is all the padding gives. Let's go with 20 pixel padding on top and bottom. Let's add style to the left. Let's add a background. Let's add a background to the other divs too. Let's add some paddings to all 3 blocks. Let's add float too. The last column will be floated to the right. Let's go with 30% width for each of them and move the center block 5% to the right. And you can see how they appear. Let's add some sections in each columns. Let's give the sections a class name. Let's say section 1. Let's go with section only. This section is a class and the section defined before is a markup. Don't get confused here. Let's add some styles to the section class then. Let's give it a height of maybe 200 pixel, background let's say white, and margin at the bottom 20 pixel just to keep them unattached from each other. Let's have a look how they appear. Let's add left and right padding to the column divs to make them look much better. And you can see the result here. Center and right columns seem to get almost attached because we missed the box sizing property in style. Let's add that. You must add it to each class name where the width is defined. And you can see the issue is fixed. Let's reduce the width of the left and right columns and make the center one larger. Let's make them 20% and 50%. And the layout looks more realistic now. The columns have huge space at the bottom than other sides. Let's reduce that. The easiest way to go with is call the class name along with colon last child. That will denote the last section class in the group. Let's set its margin bottom to 0. And you can see the spacing is equal on all 4 sides of the column. So the content section is done. Let's go with the footer section then. Here we'll have a full width container with 4 equal columns and a bit of padding on the left and right. Let's pick the background color for the footer. Let's go with the footer markup. Let's add the background and some paddings. Display will be table and width will be 100% and box sizing will be border box. You can see the footer here. Let's add the footer columns then. Let's name it column. Add style. Let's say the background is white with let's say 20% and height 100 pixel and float left. You can see how they appear. Let's add a class, let's say column right to the last column to float it to the right and column middle to the center blocks to shift them a bit to the right. Let's float the last column to the right. Then the middle columns will have 4% margin left. And you can see all the blocks are evenly spaced. Now the last section is copyright section. We can't use section markup as it already has some styles added to it, which we don't need. Let's go with div then. Let's say the class is copyright. Let's copy the background color first. We have 2 blocks evenly spaced here. Let's say one is copyleft and the other is copyright. Now add styles in CSS. Let's call copyright, define the background, padding, width, display, and box sizing. So you can see the copyright section here. Let's add styles to the blocks too. Copy left will have width, let's say 48%, float left, background white, and height is 30 pixels. You can see how it looks. Let's go with copyright then. Everything will be same except for the float, that will be right. Refresh the browser and you can see it's done. So we successfully recreated a boxed layout of a web page with basic CSS knowledge. Now we can easily add contents inside those boxes and remove the height and background wherever we don't need them. We create boxed layout as a beginner to understand the basic use of CSS in web page layout designing. Rest of the CSS will be focused on decorating elements rather than architecture of a web page. Had I added contents while creating a layout, that would have been too much information to take in for you at once. First of all, you master the architecture of a web page and then you are good to go ahead. Use any CSS layout technique to create boxed layout of a couple of web pages. Till then, I'll come up with another tutorial where we will be adding actual contents like text, images, links, and every other element we need on a web page and recreate a beautiful web page. Alright? That's all for today. Hit like if you found this video useful. Let me know what you felt after watching this video through the comments. Thanks for watching and please subscribe us for more videos. Thank you.